operation. Lucinda now provides operational leadership for the OOR, overseeing delivery of all core open research services. I would like now to introduce Lucinda to begin her talk on rights retention, the N8's path towards sustainable scholarly publications.
Oh, thank you so much, Donna, and hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here in All Ireland Open Research Week. Delighted to be here. So yeah, as Donna said, I'm going to be talking to you for about 15 minutes about our particular rights retention journey amongst the N8 and how we're aiming to build on the foundation of rights retention and try and move as close as we can to enabling more sustainable scholarly publishing. So this is what I'm going to be covering today. I'm going to look at the N8's unique context and approach to rights retention and our experiences since we launched in 2023. And then looking forward, how we're continuing to collaborate as a consortium to try and move the needle a bit towards a more sustainable publishing future. And I'll share some of our goals for the year ahead. So a bit of context, you might be thinking, what's the N8? The N8 Research Partnership is made up of 8 research-intensive universities in Northern England, and you can see them listed on the screen there in alphabetical order. And our aim, you can see at the bottom of the screen here, we aim to work together to tackle major social and economic challenges and forge partnerships that can drive growth and opportunity within our region and the wider world, ideally. So in 2023, we decided to get together to work collaboratively to introduce rights retention en masse, a big ambition. My colleague Kate O'Neill, who was at the University of Sheffield, she actually spoke at Open Research Week or a similar event for Ireland a couple of years ago, talking about our experiences then. So I hope it's useful to hear from me a year or so on and, tell you what's happened since she spoke. And obviously some people, this might be the first time you're hearing about this. Really want to acknowledge we're not claiming to be the first in terms of rights retention. I know there's been some talks today, this very day, in Open Research Week from other organisations that have introduced rights retention. Edinburgh, for example, Theo spoke, and Cambridge were early adopters as well, and really appreciate them paving the way for broader adoption. So I thought it might be useful to provide a very quick, hopefully, definition of the complex thing of rights retention. If you did attend any of the talks this morning and you feel like an expert in rights retention now, you have permission to zone out for 2 minutes or so while I go through this. And you might already have a strong understanding of this. I won't read everything on the screen, but I hope that is useful in terms of breaking it down. At its core, rights retention means that authors, the creators of research, retain certain rights to their work, such as being able to share or reuse articles that they produce. And this can be done via publishers, but it can also be done by depositing work in institutional repositories. And if an institution introduces rights retention, usually through a revision to an institutional publications policy, it allows authors to make their accepted manuscripts open access immediately on publication under Creative Commons by attribution license, regardless of what publishers say, regardless of any particular publisher embargo periods that are stipulated. Authors have permission to ignore them, and we can make the papers immediately open upon publication via our repository. Another crucial element of rights retention, which I always found dead complicated to get my head around, was about the non-exclusive license. So there's a proper definition on the screen, which I won't try and repeat. But in a nutshell, if you introduce a rights retention policy that includes a non-exclusive license to the institution, it prevents publishers from insisting that authors transfer full rights, transfer exclusive rights over research to the publisher, which is traditionally what publishers do. They make authors sign agreements and they hand over full rights. So the author loses the ownership of the work, the publisher gains exclusive rights over it. A non-exclusive license to an institution through an institutional rights retention policy means that is automatically granted. An institution can automatically share research outputs within scope of the policy upon publication, and it limits the publisher's control over the work. So we in the N8 introduced right retention as a consortium, as I mentioned, and this was really powerful in its own way. But each university brought its own perspective, its own local context to this experience. Each university faced its own challenges, but it was really nice to work together. And I'm sure Kate spoke about that previously. We've all agreed that having that mutual support was invaluable, really. And even though we've launched right retention together a couple of years, going on 3 years ago now, we actually I chaired the operational partnership across the N8 to introduce right retention, and 16 of us still meet every few months to check in. How's right retention going at your institution? Any hurdles, any other things, arising from that, and we continue our peer support. So I think that's a testament to how valuable it was to work together. But we do want to make it clear that while working together was powerful, it absolutely isn't essential. Loads of institutions have successfully introduced right retention solo, didn't need to go in a consortium. And I was thinking, I think what really matters is having the shared goal, and that could be with partner organizations that you're moving with at the same time, or it could be knowing there are others across the sector who are similarly motivated to you to introduce this, or I've got ahead and you can work with them and learn from them, like us in the N8, always happy to talk. So if you'd like to find out any more about the N8's goals when it comes to right retention, I've included a link to the statement there. I know the slides will be shared later, so you can have a look at that. And I've also included a link to a webinar that the N8 Right Retention Operational Partnership put together about a couple of years ago. And it's quite a detailed one. It contains quite a lot of detail about the practicalities of preparing for launch of right retention policies from our perspective. So it might be useful if anyone's at that stage of the process. So I thought I'd talk about our experiences post-launch, because that's a bit bringing things a bit up to date. So for the first few months after launch, oh, have I gone too far? Sorry, go back. For the first few months, things were quite smooth. A crucial success was that none of us got sued, which was a bit of a worry for us. We worried whether publishers might come at us, probably not to individual authors doing right retention, but they might challenge an institution. They didn't. Hurrah. We had no legal challenges or direct publisher pushback, but that word direct is key there, and I'm going to come back to that. There was variation across the N8 in how much right retention became business as usual, and straight away at least. At Manchester, it is very much established as part of our institutional open access options for authors. It's part of the offer that we in the Office for Open Research provide. And as you can see, we've made about 1,200 papers open access via right retention since April 2023. And so far, only one author has tried to opt out, which I think is positive. But yes, the road got a bit bumpy, a bit less smooth as time went on. Some challenges did emerge a few months after we launched, which were a bit stressful. The biggest one, which I'm sure others on the call might be aware of, was a sector-wide pushback against right retention from the publisher ACS, American Chemical Society. They introduced what I'm going to call the infamous ADC, Article Development Charge, to control and monetize green open access. And it was quite galling to see the brazenness with which this was attempted to be introduced. So this was a big challenge for the N8, as well as I'm sure for many institutions across the sector. It was challenging if you had a right retention policy, because it was a direct challenge to that. What do you do if you're going to take this agreement with this publisher, but you previously have a right retention policy? Which takes precedence? Do you take the agreement, etc.? And I'm sure other institutions, even if they didn't have right retention policies locally, they probably were quite unhappy with this aggressive attempt to restrict and control green open access for profit. So responses across our N8 group varied based on local context, as I've mentioned before. Sometimes this included local legal advice, which we always have to listen to. Some institutions, like Manchester, we said, no, we don't want the ACS agreement. We think it's terrible. We don't agree with this. And we're lucky we were in a position to not take that agreement. And we have continued to implement right retention for ACS articles without paying the ADC. And we advise authors not to do that. And so far, again, we have not been challenged. So that's positive. As you can see on the screen, other N8 organisations took different approaches. Others have stopped doing right retention for ACS papers to be on the safe side or because of formal legal advice that they've received. And even if some institutions didn't actually take the ACS agreement, they're still very wary and cautious about doing right retention. So in a way, you can see that, it worked. ACS's ploy worked really, which is a shame, but this is the world we live in. Interesting as well. As institutions, some institutions have made decisions locally to not take new publisher agreements, not talking about ACS here, talking about generally withdrawn from certain publisher TA agreements for various reasons. When that's happened, some institutions have noticed an increase in author concern about right retention. It's almost like it was not an issue when it was kind of theoretical and they were still able to publish their work gold OA via a publisher agreement. But when right retention has become the only way to achieve compliant open access for the ref and for funder policies, authors are a bit nervier about it, find it a bit more worrying. There's been more scrutiny on right retention. Are you sure it's okay to do this? Is it legal? Is there any reputational risk in us doing this? So that's really interesting to observe. And some institutions in the N8 have also noted an increased number of opt-out requests, opting out of right retention. Historically, since we launched, we've all just said, yeah, no problem. If an author says, I don't want to engage with it, that's their call. Some institutions are considering, not saying no, that would be inappropriate, but maybe gently pushing back a little bit and saying, are you sure? And making sure that the authors are making an informed decision when it comes to engaging or not with right retention and maybe addressing any misinformation. So that's interesting as well. So in June 2025, the N8 launched our Statement on Sustainable Scholarly Publishing, and there's a link there. The statement highlights the financial pressures that UK universities are facing and how current publishing models are unsustainable. And we've set ourselves quite a lofty goal here. We're going to try and, again, work collectively to encourage publishers to move towards more fair, more transparently priced open access options, basically more academically rigorous and value-added publishing platforms and services. I think this is going to be a major challenge for all of us, not just us in the N8. There's so much profit entrenched in publisher models, and there's so much esteem already built into current publishing workflows and things like that, but we feel we need to try and do something. So the way that we're taking action, the way that we're going to try and put this into practice, we've established 4 working groups across the N8, and you can see these on the screen here. They're going to try and tackle different elements of sustainable scholarly publishing. So I'm directly involved in the last one here on the screen, researcher engagement. I'm co-chairing this working group with Sarah Thompson at York. But as with the middle 2, the one on publishing models and infrastructure and research metrics, we're at a very early stage of the process at this point. We're only just getting established, really, confirming our specific priorities to pursue through 2026. But I can share a bit more information about the first working group here, which is enhanced green open access, as this is a little further along. And although I'm not in the N8 group on this, it's being led by some colleagues at Manchester, and I'm involved in the work at Manchester. So I thought it might be useful to share some information there. So enhanced green open access. This working group in the N8 is being led by my manager, our Associate Director for Open Research, Scott Taylor, and my colleague, Steve Carlton, is also working on this from Manchester with other colleagues across the N8. So this working group is trying to explore opportunities that are, coming more and more real in terms of AI-driven infrastructure for repositories, trying to make repositories not the second best option or maybe even last best option, trying to make them smarter and more useful to really not just hold research outputs, but make that research output a bit more powerful and engaging potentially. So at Manchester, we've been working on this for a little while now. We're working to develop what we're calling a next generation open research platform, aiming to offer what we're calling enhanced access to manuscripts via an opt-in model. No one's going to be forced to engage with this, but we hope authors will be interested. And we aim to enhance just the static PDF AAM and make it a more engaging, maybe interactive, joined up cool research output that we could share via a new impact repository. So that's our goal at Manchester. And we're really keen to work with the N8 via this working group to explore what you can see on the screen, key development areas which could support this, and also potentially expansion across the N8. So a bit of info on those key development areas. We're looking at AI-enhanced data extraction to try and break manuscripts down into more structured data. Like, this is the method section, this is the findings, that this was the data that underpins it, and this is the methodology, etc. Break it all down and use AI to reconstruct it in a hopefully pretty slick and machine readable way. We're looking at metadata, maybe trying to develop some new enhanced metadata schemas that could be easily processed via AI, not just humans. And yeah, developing sort of best practice for integrating AI into scholarly publishing. No, it's a contentious area. We don't want to do anything that removes humans from this. We don't want to exploit anything or anyone, but there is potentially a useful tool that we can use. We're also going to aim to encourage authors and researchers to use tools and formats that might make their work more accessible to machines, and developing repositories that support dynamic content, like not just a static PDF, like I mentioned. Could we have a video abstract? Could we have an interactive visualization? Could we have a podcast of the authors in conversation? Could you immediately click and get access to the data set that underpins it? Is there a protocol that's directly linked to this and you can see it? Doesn't have to just be as it's always been. We feel quite excited that there's opportunities to do more. Yeah, so we think there's potentially unrealized potential in research manuscripts, and development in AI could be a means of unlocking that potential to enable enhanced usage, dissemination and engagement with research findings, but also the research process as well, if we can link things up better. So being able to share author-accepted manuscripts immediately on publication with no publisher restrictions through rights retention is absolutely fundamental to being able to do anything more with the manuscript and the research that it contains. So we couldn't be where we are now without rights retention. That was a foundation, a building block. And we're really excited to build on that foundation of rights retention, take the next step to see what we can do to enhance access to scholarly work with our N8 partners. So thanks for your time this afternoon. I hope this has been useful. We will, across the N8, be sharing more work as our work progresses. Our researcher engagement working group that I'm co-chairing is all about engaging. So we'll be doing more talks and things. But do reach out to me if you have any questions after today. If you're always happy to chat. My email is on the screen, and I know these slides will be shared. And I've included those links that I think might be useful if people are interested in learning more. So thank you so much, and I will attempt to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was just amazing, and it's really given lots of food for thought. I would expect that you're going to get bombarded with queries when we come to the question section. So we're going to move swiftly on to make sure that we have time for the questions. But that was really interesting, and it's really at the top of what we're interested in at the minute. So our next speaker is Dr. Aoife Coffey, who is the research data lead in UCC, where she supports researchers making the data open and fair through tailored workshops, training, consultations, and policy work. She's going to talk to us today about navigating open research, a guide for early researchers. And if you haven't seen it or had access to it, follow it up straight after this. It's a really valuable resource for everybody in the Irish and probably for the European community. Over to you, Aoife.
Thanks, Donna. Can I just check you can all see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for the invitation to speak at the Open Research Week. I've had a look at your program. I've unfortunately haven't managed to catch any of them. It's been a busy week here in Cork. We launched a new micro-credential in data stewardship yesterday. Had our students in person on site here, which was a great day. But I'm talking about navigating open research, a guide for early career stage researchers today. This is a project that I'm very proud of, that I worked with a lot of people across the Irish research landscape to produce. So I suppose starting out at the beginning is where the inspiration came from this. It wasn't an original idea, but it was a great idea, so we copied it. So the French Passport for Open Research, which is a similar guide set within the French national context, was published in 2023. And that was soon followed by a similar guidebook in the Netherlands, Open Science, a practical guide for early career stage researchers. And I saw both of these and I was like, God, they're really useful because they provide a very accessible jump into open research for PhD students, for early career postdocs, in a way that kind of steps them through the different stages or the different facets of open research, but is highlighting national resources and national supports that are available to them. I kind of thought, God, wouldn't it be great if we had one of those for Ireland? Because a lot of our information about open research is fragmented or it's siloed within particular institutions, whereas this is a way to kind of bring it together, to coalesce all of this information into one place that we can all use across institutions. At the time, I was lucky enough to be chair of the Connell Research Group, which is a great bunch of people. Just so you know who Connell are, it's the Consortium of National University Libraries, is representative body of research libraries in Ireland and Northern Ireland. So it's an all-Ireland organisation. And it has various different groups within it, working groups within it, the research group being one. And the kind of primary, I suppose, focus of the research group is on the slide there. So it identifies opportunities to improve research enablement partnerships in areas such as open access, open science, scholarly communications, research data management, impact, digital repositories, digitalization, digital preservation, and all of that sort of good stuff. So as chair of that group, we were kind of sketching around and looking for a project at the time, and I proposed it to my colleagues on the group, and they very kind of kindly trusted me, I suppose, with this proposal and came together to work on it. In terms of the project overview, what we did, I suppose, looking at the national context, we had the NORF, the National Open Research Forum Action Plan, which has very clear kind of stipulations about our ambitions towards open research in the Irish research system. You know, by embedding open research by 2030, open research embedded at all levels of the Irish research system, and then also looking at our funders, institutions, and publishers increasingly requiring open research engagement across publications, but also data and other outputs from the research as well. So kind of nationally in the context, it was a good opportunity to bring about a project like this. We felt that there would be appetite for such a resource. So our aim was to create a national guide to support early career stage researchers or anybody who's new to open research. I think that this, we need to be cognizant that maybe our late career stage researchers also need some upskilling and need information about open research too. Highlight Irish open research services and resources. So while we do not have a very mature network or infrastructure to support open research, there are services and supports out there, and this was a way to kind of bring them together under that collective name of open research and show how they supported these things, and also to promote best practice in open research, to model best practice for early career stage researchers, for anybody who's interested in the guide. So after, I suppose, much discussion with the Connell Research Group, we decided on an approach, which would be that the research group would perform a core editorial group, so the kind of primary sort of hub for the project. But to facilitate, I think, community engagement and to draw a wider participation in the development of the guide, we would host a series of sprints, both online and in person. And again, I've already said it, but just to encourage broad community engagement in the process, in the project. So we scoped out the project and we decided on a list of deliverables, which it became very apparent early on that we were maybe a little bit overambitious and enthusiastic as one always gets at the start of these things. So in terms of our deliverables, we had the sprint series. We also decided we were going to turn it into a Git book and have a Git site dedicated to the project as well. That didn't quite happen. But, you know, that's maybe for future projects. But we had various different phases. So we had a planning phase, we had an April sprint, a June sprint, and an October sprint. And as this slide was created early in the project, we did also have another sprint in December as well. But that was a core editorial group sprint where it was mainly the Connell Research Group working on it at the time. And throughout the different phases, there was different tasks to be accomplished. So we had project planning, we had collaborative work through the sprints, and then we had the final edits through the last sprint, and also, I suppose, desk-based work going on later into the year to produce the final guide. This is one of our posters that we sent out across the national landscape to encourage people to get involved. It was really well received. I think people were really excited by this project and really interested. We had a lot of registrations online and in person. So we had 2 online ones, one in April and one in October. And then we had one in-person one kindly hosted by the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin. And we got the funding from the Connell board to provide lunch and nice nibbles on the in-person one. Unfortunately, people had to provide their own lunches when they were attending the online ones. But I suppose to take a step back, because I've kind of realized that maybe not everybody is familiar with what sprints are and how they work and why you might use them. This is something that's taken from the kind of agile IT landscape. And it is a short, focused period where a team works to complete specific tasks. So the task is time bound, but it's also really well described. It could be a milestone or it could be a deliverable. They aim to make very definite progress to very clear goals or outputs. So working during a sprint is very targeted and you stay on track, and there's various mechanisms to make sure that everybody does stay on track, as each sprint group would have a facilitator. And also we had this idea of a car park. So if groups got sidetracked or, you know, went off on little tangents, that you could say, well, put that in the car park for now and let's come back to the original task. The reason we kind of hit on the idea of working in the sprint sort of way is we felt it was a really good way to get community involvement. It's very apparent that most of our research community are very time poor. So asking them to get involved in a project that was potentially going to take 12 months to complete might seem like a bit of a daunting task, but we felt that their voices needed to be represented within it. Whereas this way, they could come to one of the sprints, contribute for kind of 2 to 3 hours, and then go off back into the wild to their day jobs and feel like, okay, I've contributed my disciplinary perspective to this guide, which is going to benefit early career stage researchers across the landscape. So I think that's one of the really great things that came out of this. But we also wanted the research community to feel shared ownership of that. And by getting them involved, by giving them these open opportunities to get involved, I think we really, you know, helped that be kind of central to the whole project. So how did it go? It's always, you know, interesting when you open up these projects to community involvement, to, you know, you plan all of this engagement. And my experience is, after a number of projects like this, is sometimes it comes off and sometimes it doesn't. Thankfully, this actually worked really well. So we had 11 Connell research groups across 10 institutions. There was a changeover in personnel in one of the institutions during the project. We had 28 participants across 15 institutions nationally. We had participation from PhD students, from early career stage researchers, research officers, postdocs, librarians. We also had senior research leaders and directors of research centres involved as well and contributing to the sprints. So a really wide kind of demographic involved in the sprint sessions. And it was all across disciplines as well. So arts and humanities, medicine and health, STEM, they were all represented in the people who participated. The project was ultimately supported by Connell and the Connell board through funding, but also by the National Open Research Forum, SONRI, the Irish Data Stewardship Network, and there was also significant support from UCC Library as well. I suppose key to running these sort of sprints is having sort of rules around it. So we had very structured sprints. There was clear instructions provided to everybody before you arrived. There was materials provided within the sprints to keep everybody on track and keep everything moving. And there was a facilitator in each sprint session to kind of bring everybody back into that kind of, primary focus of the goal that day. The early sprints had a lot of creative freedom in terms of we were like, just throw everything at it, whatever you got, bring it to the table. Whereas the later sprints, we needed more kind of editorial control, and there was a lot more kind of tighter rules around how you can contribute and what should be contributed. Lessons learned from that sprinting process is that I love sprinting. I think it is a really great way to make very quick and clear progress on specific tasks. However, there is a lot of work that has to go in advance if you are the leader of a sprint. It always takes more time than you think it will to develop that kind of clear instructions for people attending, codes of conduct, and also, setting up your sprint either in person or online to make sure that everybody can be included and feel heard and have their contribution noted. So clear instructions and goals are essential. I think thinking about the guide itself and in the later process, one of my colleagues, Frances Madden, put it in as we need a ruthless edit. And the ruthless edit was ruthless. I think we reduced the length of the guide by 2/3, basically, because we got a huge volume of information and then it was just cut until we have something that is very precise and clear. I think the other thing is as well as maybe being a little bit kind to ourselves and realizing that don't let perfection get in the way of finished, because you do have to get it over the line at the end of the day. And we are not professional copy editors. So if you are looking at the guide, please forgive us slight errors and capitalization in places and maybe a few typos and grammar mistakes. But it is a work in progress and we will continue to iterate on it. But I suppose just to finish up and give you a quick look at the guide itself. This is the structure. So we have very kind of clear structure at the start. It's broken down into sections that kind of represent the research life cycle itself. So search and prepare, research data management, write and publish and sharing your data, licensing your work, communicating your research. To make it easy to use, all of the sections have the same structure. So they have an explanation of the concept, list of useful resources, and then they all end with a getting started checklist at the end. And that getting started checklist is something, so that's just a look at one of the sections. That's the search and prepare section, and just an illustration of how they're laid out. I'm just going to move on to the checklist. So each section ends with a getting started checklist. The idea behind these checklists is that almost everybody should be able to tick one box on the checklist, meaning that they're taking a step into open research in a very kind of accessible way. So, for example, the first step on the research data management checklist is engage with your local data storage. The first step on the open access one is check your funder's open access policy. So, they're accessible steps that everybody can take on the list, and you don't have to work through them in order. It's just making it your first steps into open research in a way that makes sense for you. And then I suppose at the end of the guide as well, just to kind of sum it up, we have a kind of a summary of getting started. Here's an open research practices that you can implement starting today, and then it's, starting with thinking of the end users in society. How do you reach them? Can you engage with them? Consider existing data sets. So again, very easy prompts, nothing too difficult, no mad forms that you have to fill in, but kind of thought exercises that can get people thinking about how they might engage in open research in a way that's specific to their own work and their own project. It ends as well, I think, about, open research in your research career. This section is quite short, but I think it's actually very important, especially with the advent of COARA and the way we're looking at realigning research assessment to include facets of open research. This is a section that I think will definitely grow over time because, as it says here on the slide, the future is open. So how do I see people using the guide? There's lots of different ways. Currently, it's being used across research institutions in Ireland in various different ways. It's a CC by SA license in line with the French and the Dutch guides that we took inspiration from. So it's useful for students to share at orientation sessions, but also for research offices and graduate studies offices to bring along to their sessions as well. It's hosted in Cora. It's also hosted in a number of other institutional repositories across Ireland now, which is fantastic. And it's also in Zenodo. Just a couple of things happened since it's been published. It's indexed in OpenAIRE. I can see from our downloads in Cora that it has been downloaded across the UK, so people are finding it useful. I think we've had over 300 downloads from across the UK, but also across Europe, a wide range of European countries, France, Germany, Norway, Finland, Italy. I think we've had a few downloads in Italy and Portugal as well, but also in the US and Canada, and interestingly, India as well. We've had quite a number of downloads in India. Hopefully, they're finding it useful there too. We did have print versions made available. Sorry for the poor photographs. I thought I had better photographs from Northfest, where Northfest kindly printed in person or hard copies for all of their delegates that attended Northfest. In terms of views and downloads, we've had 717 views on Zenodo and 633 Uigín downloads. And on Cora, it's 1,931 views and 679 downloads. And I suspect that there are probably nice numbers from the other institutional repositories as well. So I think that's me nearly on time. So I'll finish up there with a thank you to all of the sprinters that got involved, the Connell Research Group members, especially Liz Noonan here in the UCC Library, who provided a lot of editorial support to the guide, and Emma Conway, who's a graphic designer in the National Library of Ireland. And also thanks to the Connell Board, National Open Research Forum, and Sonry Irish Day Stewardship Network, UCC Library, and RCSI, who provided direct supports to the project. So there we go. Any questions? Happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Aoife. That has been really interesting. I know how fabulous the resource is as I have it printed. I got a copy both in UCC and at Northfest. We will hold the questions till after our last speakers, if that's okay. And I will now like to invite our next speaker, Dorothy Uigín, and I think Shannon Reeves is going to join her.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. And yes, myself and Shannon will both be presenting. I'll just make my slides available. 1 sec. Now, hopefully you can see my slides now. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Well, Gurmila Magwif, as and Jess Shaw Horchthum, August the Shannon, Pisa Conchi and Vinyov. It is great to be here. So thanks to all involved in organising the event. And in particular, I suppose thanks to Jen for encouraging us to present at this as well. Jen Smith here in Galway. So yeah, I'm Dorothy Uigín and I work in Acad of na Scully of the Gaelga at the University of Galway. And I will be presenting with Shannon Reeves because he has worked on this project from the beginning, on the review itself, the journal that we publish. He's worked on that with me from the beginning, and certainly he's done more than hit the lion's share of the work for the retrofit we needed for applying to the DOAJ, the Diamond, to be recognised as a Diamond Open Access Journal. So to give you some background, excuse me, I'll just move on. Yeah. On Review, the name of the journal, it was first published in 2013. It's an Irish language journal, as you can guess. And the idea behind it, I mean, we started thinking about this when really we didn't know an awful lot about open research, and it wasn't that much, spoken about in the universities. But we started in 2013. We published our first edition online, and it's student-led. So they're postgraduate students who work with me on a module on academic writing. But the idea behind it was how better to get them to understand academic publishing than to get them to publish. And again, I actually have to thank my sister who came up with the idea. She's a lecturer in human rights law, and she had done a similar thing in another university. So it wasn't a new idea, but the idea was get the students involved, and encourage their critical thinking skills, give them practical experience, and at the end have a publication. So even though it's student-led, it's very much backed by the lecturers in the university. And I thought this was, again, important because the students could feel part of the academy. They could be part of this larger academic movement. So the topics covered are translation, language planning, linguistics, sociolinguistics, language teaching, and reviews. So academic reviews of other publications, thus the name of the journal. And the students, as well as being involved in the whole process from beginning to end, they also wrote an academic review each year. So they all had a publication at the end, as well as being student editors of the journal. So we did all this. We weren't thinking hugely at the time about open access. We just wanted, well, we wanted it to be available, but we didn't maybe couch it in the terms of open access. We wanted it to be available. And the Irish-speaking community isn't huge, and the Irish-speaking academic community is smaller still. But this would give us a platform to show what was going on in that community. So that's where the idea came from. So we were expanding the skill sets of the students. We were bringing them into the world of academia. We were enhancing their engagement with the academy, and it was an experiential learning opportunity. We wanted to facilitate independent and critical thinking in particular, innovation, digital literacy, and that was important at the time, even though we weren't really thinking of it in the terms of digital literacy. We were more talking about academic literacy and being able to use the language of academia, but the digital literacy was certainly there. And then advanced writing skills. Okay, so we decided to, we also decided at the time that it would be online. So that was back in 2013. So obviously that's obvious from what I've just said, but we didn't look at any questions of copyright at the time or anything about rights, publishing rights or licensing. It didn't, I have to be completely honest, it didn't even come into my thinking. It wasn't part of what we were engaged with at the time. So what's the role? Well, it has been great. I mean, it has worked really, really well. It's helped with student development and editorial training. They've developed academic literacy, and I often use this quote, academic language is no one's mother tongue, not even that of the children of the cultivated classes. So we wanted them to become literate in the academic language. And for some of them who were not native speakers of Irish, it was more complicated still. They were writing in a language, very often that was their second language, and then there was this third element of academic writing, which, as I say, it's no one's mother's tongue. It has made, I like to think, and I don't think I'm over exaggerating, or I'm exaggerating here. It has made a big contribution to Irish language scholarly discourse. There isn't very many academic journals being published online in Irish. There's one other, and we were there before them. So it has, become part of the landscape that it's published every year. And we have up to now over 200 academic peer-reviewed articles. So as I said, even though it's student-led, it's peer-reviewed. Lecturers in other universities across the country and beyond work on that, and the academic staff here also work to ensure that the standards are very, very high. I think as well, it's been great. It's enhanced the student membership of the Academy. We wanted the students to feel at home and to feel that they were part of that academic group. And it's been very good creating communities of practice within Irish language, I suppose, research. And also it provides scaffolding for the students when they then started publishing more themselves. And we provided scaffolding that allowed them to do it in the review, but also then to go further and to publish in other journals, were they online or not. So Shannon has worked with us as a designer from day one. So everything we see on the site is his work. Now, as I said, we may not have consciously set out to create an OER initially, but we did have a commitment to the values of OERs. It was going to be open and educational. It was free. We weren't going to charge any of the writers. We got a small grant, an annual grant, not even less than €1,000, just really to pay for, to launch it and to have the typesetting and a few other bits and pieces. But basically, it was free to publish in it, and it was easily accessible. So they were what we were thinking, even though we may not have used that language. What we hadn't done was to release any material under license or dealt specifically with any questions of copyright. Now, having said that, in the 13, 14 years that it's been published, nobody has ever come back to us and had a problem with anything that we've published, or there hasn't been any questions or any issues. Now, that's not to say that everything was done as it should have been done, but I suppose sometimes ignorance is bliss, and my ignorance of the whole licensing area, that was my fault. But I was understanding that really we needed to make this right. So that's why we I spoke with Jen in the library here in Galway, and I wanted to regularize questions of licensing and copywriting, and also, to just, I suppose to give the students maybe and the writers, to give them the acknowledgement that really they deserved for producing a very high an art or journal that's a very high standard. I think it was Jen's suggestion of the DOAJ, which of course I knew about. I did know about it, but I wasn't quite sure about how we'd go about it. So we did want to, though, regularize those questions. It became kind of a strategic priority for the journal's development going forward, because things like these, the licensing questions are coming more to the fore. And also we there were the academic benefits of discoverability, credibility, and better integration with the scholarly infrastructure. So that's why we decided to try and make it, or I suppose adjust it, or retrofit it, as we have in the name of the paper, retrofit the article to suit what was needed by the DOAJ, and to make an application then to the DOAJ. And I think now I'm going to let Shannon come in, and Shannon will talk about all the practical elements of the retrofit.
Yeah, can everyone hear me okay there? Yeah, brilliant. So Dorothy's going to still be controlling my slides, so I'll just give you a nod, Dorothy, to go to the next. So as Dorothy says, I've been involved with this journal since the outset, and initially my role was to do the typesetting and also to build the website. And then Dorothy approached me in February last year, so it's kind of a year that we've been on this project. And we had a meeting with Jen, who really kind of helped us to get our hands around the whole thing. And in fairness, the DOAJ are also very supportive in that they make all of their requirements very easily accessible on their website. So the first thing we had to do was kind of figure out, what's actually required here, open access standards, which I'm sure everyone in the room is really familiar with, but I'll just run through a couple of the key points. Journals must provide immediate free access to all content with no delay. Copyright holder grants usage rights through open licenses. And users can read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, and link to the full text of the articles without any sort of limitations there. And so key requirements to actually, signal this, you need to have your open access statement displayed on the journal website, content to be available for free, no registration barriers, articles available as individual full text with unique URLs, no intrusive advertising. Print versions may be charged, but online access must be completely free. And then in terms of quality and transparency, there are editorial standards that the DOAJ require, including an active qualified editorial board, peer review process. They have a couple of different options there, but some sort of peer review process is required, and what you use must be documented. And then they recommend adherence to scholarly publishing best practices, and they link that material on their website. And then in terms of technical requirements, we have the requirement for an ISSN, licensing terms, and embedded licenses to be provided with all of the content to make everything clear. Copyright terms as well, so that it's clear what happens to the copyright as well as the licensing of the material. Preservation and archiving is important, and to make sure that the content is deposited in some kind of long-term digital archiving system. Again, part of the best practice recommendation, and something thankfully that we were already doing. And the use of persistent identifiers. So luckily, a few years before this, we actually had retroactively got DOIs across all of our articles. So it was a big job that was already done. So Dorothy, if you want to move on there to the next one, please. Yeah. So once we had our kind of understanding of what was required, we had to look through and kind of analyze what do we already have, which fortunately was actually quite a lot. As Dorothy said, we've been kind of on the right track all along. It's just that we haven't actually necessarily documented all of this. So we already had our ISSN, our DOIs, our articles were all being archived in the university's research repository. Everything was free to access. We had the individual articles, and there was a peer review and editorial board already set up. What we needed to change and develop really was to document all of that. So, listing all of the processes, making sure that the editorial board and all of that was made available on the website, and the instructions to authors also being published on the website as opposed to just being sent out with our call for papers every year. And then to make available what metadata we had already in our site and add a little bit more. And one other thing that we added was a self-archiving policy for authors to be able to choose how they handled their articles after we had published them. And that gave us the scope of the deep retrofit. So we had to set out to create, publish all of these policies, documentation to formalize the processes that we had. And then we also had to go through a retrospective licensing process. And this is really where the support of Jen came in and was absolutely amazing, to have an open access librarian sort of on call so that we could get her input on everything that we needed to know more about, was really brilliant, because it seemed quite straightforward, but actually as you get into the detail of these things, they can be quite complex. So thank you again, Jen. Dorothy, if you want to move on there for us, please. So yeah, then we came to the implementation. We wrote up our documentation, which in the end came to about 2,400 words, and we had to make it bilingual because, of course, we're writing all of this for the Irish language audience, but we don't want to assume that the DOAJ are going to actually be able to read all of these technical policies. And so we made everything bilingual for their benefit. And we also then had to implement the changes to the website infrastructure, primarily to add the licensing on every article. And we also went to all of our previous authors, and I was actually having a look there. I think we have about 170 authors over the years. So Dorothy contacted every one of them and basically said, we're going to apply a CC BY license retrospectively. If you object, please let us know. And out of the 170 authors, we had one objection. One objection, and that wasn't even an objection to having the license applied, but actually they specifically wanted a CC BY no derivatives license. So That actually threw a little bit of a spanner because we had to kind of come up with a new system for implementing a variety of different licenses. But now that's there. If other people want other specific licenses, we can do that. And at this point, we also took the opportunity to add OrcID integration. So as authors come to the site, if they have OrcIDs, that can be added to their profile, and any content that they ever publish with us in future will also have that bundled in. And we also then, just to streamline the application process for the DOAJ, we published all of our policies under 2 pages, basically, an About Us page and instructions for authors page. And then we created some deep links to the relevant sections so that for each question on the DOAJ application, we're able to give them a link specifically to that section. Dorothy, will you move on there, please? Thanks. Yeah, so of course, we had some challenges. The main challenge being getting our head around all of the information, but then once we'd kind of figured out everything we needed to do, we also hit a few stumbling blocks that kind of had the potential to blow up the scope of the project beyond what we could handle at this point. So, again, as Aoife was saying, not letting the perfect being the enemy of the good was really important here to actually get this process done. So we noted that actually, we've never really taken good care of image licensing. And so, over this catalog, we have 400 images of various sort of states of copyright compliance or unknown. And we decided that for the sake of getting this process completed, we were going to put a pin in that and defer that. But we have added new requirements going forward for all of our contributors that they need to make sure that everything is licensed properly moving forward. And the other thing that we haven't done yet is we have embedded our licenses on the website, but we also provide PDF copies of everything, and we haven't gone back through yet and embedded the licenses on all of those PDFs. Again, that's a job to be done at a later stage. Dorothy, will you move on there for us? Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the application itself, once you have all that work done, is quite straightforward. Gathering all of the information together, the DOAJ have a very helpful checklist with all of their questions that you can work through. We prepared and workshopped our application until we felt it was ready, got the evidence together, the documentation, and Dorothy filled and submitted just last week, I think.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
last week.
exactly. So if you want to pop onto the last slide, then there's just a little timeline overview. It's kind of amazing, really, that it took us a whole year to get through this project. But of course, not only did we have to do all of the work, but we also had to keep publishing our journals. So we kind of managed to get an issue in there and make it open access in May so that we had our year's requirement for the DOAJ before we submitted our application. And then we worked through the policies and the translations over the autumn, did all of the implementation work over sort of December, January, and finally got our application in just last week. So yeah, very proud. I'm pleased to have it done. I'll hand back over to Dorothy now, who's going to tell us a little bit about what's next for us and some lessons.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Shannon. Yeah, so the process did take a year, and we have been thinking about, as we said before, that for a while, but actually once we got started, it did take probably a bit longer than we expected. And a lot of that was down as well to us being all very busy, doing other projects. So we weren't just totally focused on it. And of course, it would have been quicker had we had more time to devote to it. But yes, the application is submitted. As we mentioned there, we have over 200 peer-reviewed articles now up and available, and they've been there since we started, and we have had over 170 authors. So we are very happy with that. We're very happy that the review exists, and we're happy now that we have, I suppose, attacked those issues about copywriting and licensing, and that we have added a copyright license to everything that is on the review. The timeline to the DOAJ's decision, it's 3 months, so I'm hopeful that we'll have it in early May, where the next journal, the next edition of the journal will be published. I think from my point of view, I certainly have learned an awful lot during the year about the process and from the process. And I think in a way, because I lecture the students as well about publishing in a way. This is a huge learning curve for me, that now I'm more aware of these types of things and that I can share that knowledge with the students. So the future benefits, improved discoverability and credibility, as we said, greater reach for Irish language scholarship, better protection with the licensing, and newly enhanced requirements improve publication standards. So there's no doubt about that. The lessons are, if we can give any advice, are the key challenges. I suppose retrofits can be painful, and it's better to do it before you start, is the thing. So if you are thinking about publishing online or starting an online journal, I'd certainly advise it. I think it's great, and I think the students have learned a lot, but do these things at the beginning. Okay. This copyright and the licensing should be done from the beginning. As we said, though, it's worth noting that like only one person came back with a question about the copywriting when we did add a copyright license, and we've never had any complaints over the years that it has been published, and nobody has ever asked about the images that have been published. Now, partly that's to do with the Irish language community being quite small, and we know each other. So, it's a kind of a happy arrangement in a way, but that wouldn't always be the case with every community. So yeah, the question of images is one that needs to be looked at before one would start publishing. And I think that's it. I mean, I have added some references at the end. They may be useful or not to people, but again, Shannon and I are happy to take questions if there are any questions about the project. Gormila Malbeth.
Thank you.
Thank you very